Okay, so today I'm going to be changing out all three rear control arms and replacing the bearing. This has been several months I've been waiting to do this. I finally decided to pull the trigger and knock it out. The car has been so much nicer since I redid the front end, but I'm not sure if the stiffness of the front end has put a lot of stress on the back end, but I'm hearing so much popping and creaking back there. Perhaps my ears are just more attuned to it now, I'm not sure. So I'm really hoping this will just take care of all of that. Of course, then I'm sure I'll start hearing the popping and creaking in the convertible top and the door panels and whatever else needs to be tightened up. But anyway, one of the first things you're going to need to do, unless you own these parts already, is go to your local auto parts store and borrow a slide hammer and an axle puller. That's how you're going to remove the hub from the center of the bearing. And I like to use this master bearing remover tool. You have to put this on your credit card. They're not just going to let you walk out the door with it. And like this master bearing puller, it's by itself is worth over $500. So take their receipt, fold it up, put it in your wallet, because that receipt is worth $500 on this particular tool. And anyway, when you return with the receipt, they will reimburse your credit card for the full amount. This time I ordered all the parts from Auto Haus. The longer control arm there is from TRW, the tuning fork control arm, made in Germany. I could not find TRW or any other part that I have used on the car in the past, any other company, for the shorter control arm. So I got Miley. I wasn't sure about them, but they got pretty good reviews. I was worried their control arm might be made in China, which, you know, I think China's doing a much better job now on stuff than they used to. But to my surprise, that control arm is made in Taiwan. So unless you're a communist Chinese and don't believe Taiwan's its own country, then yes, it's not made in China, but made in Taiwan. The bearing is by FAG, and that was made in Slovakia. Now this coffin control arm, I actually purchased all four of those at a discount when I did the front, and so it is a Sedum made in Belgium. So this car has parts from all over the world, all over it. And the only Chinese part so far, the front wheel bearing, when I replaced it, I got AC Delco Gold, thinking, oh, that's a good American company, and gold, that would be their highest quality parts. But to my surprise, it came in and had China stamped on it. But so far, so good with that. I'm gonna go ahead and remove this brake, and we'll get started. So I have the brake off and out of the way, and this is a really good time to take the air gun and blow out all the brake dust from around your emergency brake. And as I get everything put back together, I am going to adjust, and this is how you adjust, by turning this through one of these holes, adjust the emergency brake, because mine's a little on the weak side. But anyway, after you have your brake up and out of the way, this panel right here inside the wheel well, you've got two 10mm plastic nuts. Remove those, pull this, and then pop it up from here, and that'll give you a little bit better access to the end of this long tuning fork control arm. Okay, so I got the panel out. The next thing I'm gonna wanna do is I'm gonna try to remove this hub while everything is still attached, all the control arms. That way, when I'm using the slide hammer, it's not just pulling against my strut right there. First thing I got to do though is remove this nut, and I'm not really sure in metric, but this socket is 1.25 inches that fits on it. And away it goes. All right, so I have the slide hammer attached, and yes, you're seeing right. I'm using 3 of my lug nuts to hold this thing to the hub, and I really wish I had thought about this ahead of time. I would have gone and found just 3 bolts that would be the same size and put them through here, because this is going to mar up the back side of the lug nuts. If you ever do this, don't use the same lug nuts ever. Just use them one time for that one bearing, and then when you go to the other side, use 3 different lug nuts. because you will mar them, and I imagine that if more you do it, the more you're going to wear them out and have to replace the lug nuts. But anyway, if you're not familiar with a slide hammer, it's a very barbaric sort of a thing. I'm just going to pull this and hit many times as hard as I can, and I have a touch of arthritis now in my hands, and from doing the passenger side last night, I woke up with my hands hurting this morning. So I am going to put on some gloves. I'm not sure that that's going to help me much, but it hopefully will help a little bit. But anyway, here we go. And as you go, you will have to tighten the lug nuts. All right, and just like the last time, it actually pulled the center of the bearing out. So I'm gonna have to take a Dremel tool and cut that to remove it from the hub. Whew. So here's your hub, the center of the bearing stuck on there. Using a Dremel tool with a cutoff wheel, and I will tell you that the normal cutoff wheels, I tried a couple of them, they hit and almost immediately broke, and then I found, I have a new kit, I'm not really sure what all's in it, but I had two of these wheels that say reinforced on them, and this is the one I used, and it actually cut through it pretty slick. It took a few minutes, but you know, better than I had thought that it was going to do. But then of course I dropped this to the floor and it broke the center of it, so this wheel's useless now. So I'm going to try to take care of this one because it's the last one I've got. But anyway, all I'm going to do is go up either side, and I'm going to be extremely careful not to touch the hub itself. Just the bearing part that I want to cut away, and I'm going to use the Dremel on the highest speed setting. You may want to wear protective eyewear. There we go. Gracious. So, even though I'm not going to be able to pull the bearing until I get the control arms and everything loose, I'm going to go ahead and take this plate off. It's held in by 4 bolts. They take a 13mm socket, and you'll notice there's this little notch at the bottom. Not really 100% positive what that's for, but when I replace this plate, I will put it back exactly the way it is with the notch on the bottom. And so now I'm going after this mid-length control arm. It's in the very back of the car, the very back control arm. Once again, you're going to need a 19mm wrench this time. There's not really a way because of the sway bar bushing holder here to get a good socket and ratchet on that. But so 19mm on the bolt, 18mm on the nut. And now same control arm, but I'm going to be taking this nut here, but I'm going to use my pneumatic impact driver just so I can maybe knock it loose and get it off as quick as possible in hopes that that bolt does not want to start turning. Okay, so next will be the bolt coming through the middle of the coffin control arm. The nut or the bolt on the bottom is you'll need an 18mm socket. On top, I don't have a large enough metric, but 13/16 fits it pretty snugly. So next will be the nut on top of the ball, over the ball joint, where the coffin control arm connects to the wheel carrier. So it is 18 millimeter, but I have no room to move here. All right, so I want to remove the nut here on the sway bar link that is holding the wheel carrier to the shock absorber. You have to put a 17 millimeter wrench on the back side of this sway bar link bolt to keep it from spinning. And then you'll need an 18 millimeter on the nut itself. And that 17 millimeter wrench has wedged itself against the inside of the wheel well, so I don't really have to hold it right now. All right, because what I'm going to want to do is drop this wheel carrier down. I'm going to pull the bolts from these two control arms that I took off, the first two that I removed the nuts from. I'm going to remove those bolts, and I'm going to try to drop this wheel carrier down and out so that I can get this transaxle or drive shaft, whatever you want to call it, out from in there. And then I'll put everything back so I can start trying to remove the bearing. The reason I'm going to go through that much trouble, on the passenger side, I put the wheel carrier on the ground and tried to get the bearing out, and what I ended up doing was bending these heat shields from the brakes here, dust shield, heat shield, whatever they are, and it took a long time to get them bent back so that they didn't rub the rotor later when I reassembled on the other side. So I want to keep this off the ground if at all possible. Plus, you're pulling a lot on your emergency brake cable when you have this on the ground, and I don't want to mess anything up with that. Especially this looks old and brittle right in there. This bolt on this back control arm, you've got to rotate it and stuff because it gets up against the, I guess that's a catalytic converter, it's not the muffler. But it will come out. Just keep wiggling it. This other one here should come out pretty easily, I think. There we go. Yep. I'm going to put it with its washer. See, it's got a groove in it, and the washer's got a little smiley face guy there that goes in the groove. Yep, just keep all of it together. Sway bar link. There we go. That might give us some freedom. Nope. Why? So I got the control arm out. I had to pry and pry with a bar to even get it to come out. But once I had it out and the other control arm on the back here, I was able to pull out and down and take my drive shaft then out of the bearing and come around behind. I've got it just sitting over here, kind of resting on the control arm and the sway bar support there. And I tried to stick the control arms back to get in to support this while I pull the bearing, but as hard as that was to get out, it would be ridiculous to try to put it back. So I think I have enough support here with this other control arm holding the coffin and a few other things to kind of do this. But anyway, time to assemble this bearing puller. And you'll see me do some odd stuff like using extra of these space or cap pieces, whatever they're called, just because the bolt is so long that what I'll end up doing is when I put the nut on the end, I'll end up having to screw it in so far that it's hard to put a socket or anything on the back side, which actually I have a wrench now, so I guess it wouldn't be that bad. But anyway, that's just the way I've been doing it. You want to, with this piece, you use, what are they calling this here? A support plate, and this is a spacer. The two of them together make the cup, and the cup will go here. That way when the bearing is pulled, it gives it a place to go. It'll end up inside the cup here. So you'll have those guys. You'll want to find the washer that is the same size or just a hair smaller than the bearing, and that'll go on the back with this little beveled raised part on the outside. I'm going to use a second one of those just to once again take up space on the bolt. The nut has a beveled part that goes inside that bevel piece I just showed you, and then the actual nut part is on the end, and it'll go this way on the outside, so that bevel part will go towards the bearing. So you want to try to get this thing centered here. I'm going to use these bolt holes to give me a visual. On this particular kit, a 15/16 fits the bolt head. On the other side, it is a 1 1/16. Set to tighten. Okay, so the bearing is out, and sorry for all the noise. I think it's because I'm using a very old impact driver. It's just taking a lot of air, and I know it has an air leak inside. It's got a gasket blown or something. For those that don't know, I lost all my tools in a house fire, and so I have just been getting pieces here and there from people and stuff. So yeah, you may see me using something in a tool inappropriately, but I digress. Anyway, so what I have done, and let me get this camera real quick, I can show you. The bearing is out. Now, what makes this very easy with the drive shaft out of the way and everything is this nut that's on top of the ball joint for the coffin control arm is no longer being blocked by the drive shaft here. So, or transaxle, it's not really a drive shaft. So anyway, with that off, the nut out, I'm gonna take this long control arm and go back in here. I've got to go under the car, and it has a bolt that goes up. On this particular car, the nut is kind of made in back there. It's hard to see it, but that gold thing kind of anyway, that's sort of your nut. It's a long square nut. Your bolt is up under there, up under those bushings and everything under the control arm. But anyhow, believe it's an 18 millimeter socket you'll need. Take that bolt out and wiggle this larger control arm out, and then I'll change the coffin one out before I put the transaxle back in. That way I can get the nut tightened down without having everything in the way. All right, so not a good way to get the camera to where you can see, but I put a pry bar with an 18 millimeter socket on there, and I had to climb under the car to even figure out how to get the socket to it. But yeah, there we go. So maybe after a couple of turns with the pry bar, I think it'll be easier to put a ratchet on there with a long extension. All right, so using 18 millimeter socket, ratchet, long extension. All right. And there you have it. And look at that. That's crazy. But what I want to do right now is get the coffin control arm off. So we'll use our separator here. All right, so using the separator and a lot of hammer hits in a very short space that I had over here to hit it, I now have this control arm off. We should be able to go ahead and get the other control arm off. This wheel carrier is being held up by the bolt for the sway bar link and the shock absorber, so you don't want to hit on it a whole lot. You do want to, you know, let's just take a quick peek at this. It's not supposed to be this way. Anyway. There we go. Uh-oh. This comes over here, that comes over here, and Bob's your uncle. Once again, screwy loose. Probably loose down here too. So this new one here, they come with this protective cap, I guess, so the rubber boot doesn't dry rot or whatever while it's sitting in the warehouse somewhere. Once again, the inside of the bolt has a star bit, and if I am not mistaken, it would actually take a T40, because for some reason these new ones, they spin while you're trying to tighten the nut down. So you are going to have to try to hold that in place. Shove inside. Use the new nut that came with it. Wow. That is amazing. I have not been able to do a single one of those without having to put the bit up in the top. Okay, so the torque on that main ball joint on the coffin control arm on that nut is 56 foot-pounds. So I'm going to see. I haven't been able to properly torque one of those yet, if this one will hold still. There we go. All right. This is some high temperature grease here. I'm gonna put a coating of it around the inside of this. The bearing itself, see the frost on it. It's been in the freezer for about 24 hours. Hopefully the metal has constricted enough. It's about 90 degrees out here today. Somebody said that you want the writing, which is this part. FAG W082 Z545495.09 Slovakia. Anyway, I don't know if any of that means anything to anybody, but you might need some of that information. Yeah. So it didn't shrink up enough, but as long as it will sit right there for just a second, I'm going to take one of these large step washers out of that kit. Not that large, though. It's gotta be bigger than that one. Let's be step washer in. Yeah. So what I want to do is I want the flat side, and I want it to be big enough that it touches the outsides here. And I'm going to take my hammer, and I'm going to try to just very lightly get this thing set as well as possible. And also, you want it to be as straight as possible going in. Right now, I will tell you, it looks like this top part is stuck in a little further than this bottom part. All right. That looks pretty even. Okay. So now, before we pulled the bearing, we had this cup space here for the bearing to go into. So we no longer need that part. We want to actually be able to press the bearing in, which means we need to turn this whole thing around. And so we're going to need one of these that's large enough to push on the wheel carrier, but not go down into the bearing housing hole, which is the one I have in my hand now. So we'll thread this through. All right, now I want something big enough. This may actually be too big. No, that should work. I want it to press the bearing, and I want it to be big enough so that it hits the outside of the wheel carrier, outside the bearing, and lets me know when we're flush. And to take up some room, just like we did last time, I'm going to add a few more things here. Go in a descending order, maybe. And then the nut. The flare part goes into that part right there. The nut part goes on the outside. That feels like it's pretty close to centered in the back. There. So this is the nut. So this is a 1. Yeah, this is the 1 1/16. Yeah. I can put that on the impact. And on the inside, I have the 15/16, so I can just put a wrench on that. Since we're tightening and not loosening, the wrench will go on this side. All right, so there is our freshly pressed bearing. Very flush. We got all the pieces out from the back. Next thing is your plate here that will assure that the bearing is being held in. Remember, it's got this little notch cut out here that will go at the bottom. Real driver here. I'm just gonna save myself a few minutes. I don't think I ever saw a torque spec on these. So like most things, I'll get them down pretty good, but just not too hard. All right, next we're gonna get this hub pressed into the bearing. And once again, I'm gonna use some of this grease. All right, so just like we did with the bearing, got the same setup, the really large piece on the back that just pushes against the wheel carrier that does not push against the bearing. On this side, I'm going to use that. It's large enough to hit on these protrusions there. I might as well use this larger step washer and the nut. Probably about it. I turned the air compressor off. I was just tired of the noise. I just ran myself almost completely out of air. That should be it. The hub has a ridge that'll hit the bearing. And you'll know it when you hit it. You can't go any further. Disassemble all this, then put the drive shaft back in. There's a little bit of this grease on the splines of the gear shaft. I could actually go inside this hub, I guess, and keep my hands cleaner. Sway bar link bolt out, and then drop the wheel carrier down some. Make this up over that. This down some. A lot more. I don't want it to fall out, I just want it down. And this pushes in just a little. Line it up with the hole. Try to get that shaft pointed as straight out the hole as you can. And wiggle it until you feel the splines. There they went. All right. And there should be a ginormous nut sitting here somewhere besides myself. All right. So once you have it, you know the splines are all lined up. Go ahead and put your nut on. And then as it tightens down, it'll pull those splines on through 1.25 inches. Socket there. So that is it for that bearing and hub assembly. I might put some kind of rubber conditioner back here on this boot. Maybe go for this. Remember, outside. Goes outside the car, not inside. I do remember having a lot of trouble getting the new bearing, new bushings pushed in. I guess they're a lot stiffer and thicker. Oh, by golly, I think that just... remember, it's the longer of the two bolts that have no nut. Well, actually, that one does have a nut somewhere. Okay, got that one started. I'm not going to tighten anything until I got everything going here. So maybe I'll go ahead and grab that last control arm. It goes in the back with the ball joint. Over the sway bar and in. That part into the wheel carrier. Ooh, that went in slick. And I might as well try to get this sway bar bolt. Okay, so there goes my sway bar link. And it has a shiny nut. Still got to get this back right in there. Might be about where it needs to be. Let's see if I can get this guy over here started. There we go. All right. And these washers, they have these lines on the outside, not on the inside. So make sure you keep them out. There we go. Good, good, good. Washer. And now this final bolt here is going to be tuning fork to coffin. Woohoo! Okay, so the only bolt that is tight, or only nut that is tight, is the one on the coffin ball joint. I'm gonna go ahead and do the one here for the tuning fork to coffin. Okay, so the back of the coffin control arm. Yeah. Good. Rear control arm. Okay, so that's the back control arm finished. And now for the bolt back here, 18mm socket. Don't really have a good way to show you guys where that is back there. All right, before I forget about it, let's go back to the sway bar link. Should be good. This guy right here will be the last one I have. I think it's an 18. It is. It's turning, which is most unfortunate. Well, it's got to be the 30 then. And I believe it's the same torque as the other guy, the other ball joint. There you go. All right. So let's see. We got the guy on the far end, tuning fork to coffin ball joint to wheel carrier torque down. Coffin control arm to body or chassis, the rear control arm to wheel carrier, and rear control arm to chassis, and also sway bar link to control arm. That is all of them. Probably condition this boot with some rubber conditioner and put the brakes back together. And I am going to try to adjust the parking brake just a little bit on both sides, because I have had a couple incidences on an incline that the car just wanted to roll. So take care of that while I'm here, and that will be that. And then tomorrow morning I think I'm going to take it to the alignment shop, get an alignment on it, because I'm very eager to drive it. I don't want to wait any longer. And we'll see. Okay guys, so I just finished taking a test drive, and I want to show you something here real quick. I have had this car for a little over 2 years now, and it has never gone over the curb without making a fair amount of noise. And here lately it's been making a lot of noise. As far as the test drive, quiet, smooth, but squirrely. I'm definitely going to go tomorrow and get an alignment. Even the steering wheel that I had straight after I did the front, I did my own sort of string alignment. Now as I'm driving, I'm having to compensate a little bit to the right. So I guess the back end is fighting the front end right now. But overall though, very impressed, very happy with it.